morning by just talking a little bit about how I have two different professional sides to my life. So one is an academic and scholar and researcher, and the other is as a creative writer. And so I've written lots of different things about the topic of consent, and so we're going to talk about this a little bit later. But so I have a memoir about consent, and then I also have this nonfiction book. It's actually a manifesto about consent. And so I go back and forth in my life between these two spheres. And what I wanted to talk about this morning was a project that I have been working on that's coming out in September that really marries those two aspects of my life. But I wanted to share a little bit about what led to this project that I want to talk to you about this morning. So I've spent the last 15 years or so talking to college students about sex on campus. And, I give a lot of talks on campus, but also I feel like I sit around with pizza a lot, like pizza and students, and we're just chatting after some sort of lecture I've given. And there was this conversation I had with a bunch of seniors, really. They're almost all seniors. They had stayed after my talk. There's about 15 of them. And we were, they were talking about sex. And they were all very open. And they had all been sexually active. They were all sexually active. And this one young woman at one point asked, what is really the difference between holding hands and having sex? Like, she asked that very simply. Why? Why is sex such a big deal? That was her question. So I, of course, being a professor person, threw it back to her and was like, well, why is sex such a big deal? And so we were, talking about that. And then at one point I asked them, I was like, well, what is good sex to you? And this stumped them, that question, what is good sex? And I was like, they were like, well, we've never thought about it before. And I was like, what do you mean you never thought about it before? You're all having sex and you haven't thought about good sex? Like, what's going on in the world? Like, you think about it. Let's talk about it right now. But during that conversation, I was like, whoa. Like, you've never thought about what good sex is to you, but you're all having sex. And I was thinking about how, wow, okay, so I knew our sex education was really impoverished, but I know this is being filmed, but holy shit, like, really, we're not raising our kids to ask that question. We're not inviting them. We're not empowering them to ask that question. And so that conversation, or that realization, which was many years ago now, really shifted how I approach conversations about sex on campus. And one of the things that I started doing was talking to college students about how, like, hello everyone, like, you're in college, like, you are in these spaces with more resources than you will ever have in your existence. Colleges are these privileged institutions. And I want you to dedicate at least one semester toward a big question. Because we used to love to think about, asking the big questions, like, who am I, what is my purpose in the world, like, when we go to college. And I was like, the big question I want you to ask is, what does it mean to be a sexual BA? And what is my relationship to this aspect of my humanity? And I want you to dedicate yourself to it. Like, I want you to write papers about it. I want you to read books. I want you to go to therapy. Like, I want you to do all these different things. I want you to figure out, like, I want you to go sit down with the professor and be like, I know you assigned this paper, but I want to do a different paper. Can I do it? Can I research this thing? And figure out all the different aspects of your education where you might be able to explore this aspect of who you are. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to your partners. And what I really want for college students is to become thinking beings around this issue. And I believe if we become thinking beings around sex, that consent will follow. And maybe I'm naive, but this is what I think. And so what I wanted to talk about this morning was this new project, which I feel like the last 15 years of my life have been preparation for this one thing that I have just done and that I have coming out this fall. So I've been thinking a lot for many years about, what does it mean to interrupt and transform systemic sexual violence and harassment? Like, how do you do this? Like, really, like, one of the things that we were asked before the symposium was like, what sort of solutions do we have to propose there? So, anyway, as a, I'm this researcher person and this professor person, but I'm also this writer person. And one of the things I've done for the last 12, 15 years of my life is also I write a lot of novels, and I write, a lot of those novels are for young adults and for middle grade readers. And so I'm part of that conversation. So I know lots of different writers who write for kids, and I think of that work is another space in which I can be in conversation with people. And so I began to think about, because I have a lot of friends who've been like, they'll ask me for advice, like, how can I talk to my kids about sex? And so I've been thinking about that for a while, and I got an invitation to write a nonfiction middle grade book for kids about sex. And I really believe, I think it's the most important thing that I've ever written. So anyway, so this is coming out in the fall. It's called The Big Questions Book of Sex and Consent. And the framework of it is sort of my fantasy for maybe how we should be having these conversations with kids. And part of my approach has to do with, after all these years of listening to college students, if I was going to go back and do everything over again, because this is what they're all thinking about too, if only I could go back to my younger self, what would I tell that person? And so this is sort of sex education and consent education the way I wish it would happen. So anyway, so this is going to come out in the fall. And I wanted to tell you my approach to this, or talk to you about it. So the whole point of this book is to get kids to become critical thinkers about sex. And one of the things that I don't think we do a good job of, because of biases in education, we all know too, of course, for those of us who are thinking about anything to do with sex, the body, gender, etc., we devalue all of those things in the university. We devalue the subject for the objective. We devalue the personal, etc. And so one of the things that we don't do a good job of is teaching kids to be thinkers about sex, or teaching kids to be thinkers just about themselves. And so the approach to the book is not a how-to of sex or a how-to of consent. One of the things that's really bothered me about consent education is we teach yes means yes, no means no, so we do the how of consent, but we don't do the why. Like, why should you care about consent? Why should you care about your partner? Like, what does this mean? Like, why are we even having this conversation about consent? We do avoidance. We teach compliance, essentially. You're talking about the law. We have lawyers who are defining how we do this kind of education, and so we don't really have a human approach to this. So this is literally, it's not a how-to to have sex. I talk a lot about how we do technical consent education and technical sex education, but we don't really try to open up these questions to kids. So I'm interested in empowering kids and young adults to really think about who I am in relation to this issue, and also to develop a sense of ethics, which I think is really important. So I'll just show you really quickly. So it's very hard to see. I squashed the whole table of contents onto the slide. But I wanted to point out, the very first thing that says, welcome my fellow philosophers and ethicists. And one of the big features of the book is trying to get kids to think about the fact that we are all engaging in ethical behavior all the time. Like right now here, because we're in a room of multiple people, there's an ethical quality to all of our interactions. And so I want to get kids to think about these things. And so the approach of the book is literally to help kids explore these big questions. And it doesn't give answers and say, this is the right answer to this. The book is really sort of pitches this education as a journey that helps kids build a framework for becoming thinkers about sex and consent that is flexible enough to accommodate the ways in which they may change as they grow, or the things that they may reevaluate as they get older. And so I think
you can see the second question, who are you anyway? Becoming a critical thinker about yourself. Like, that's where I started. And then, there's all sorts of things in here. There's, what does it mean to be a sexual being? Why are people so afraid of sex? And it goes from there. So, just very briefly, one of the things that I learned from talking to college students is it's really hard for college students to talk about anything to do with sex in general because they feel so vulnerable. But one of the things that they're really good at talking about with regards to ethics specifically is if I shift the conversation to friendship, college students will readily, if I say, like, what does it mean to be a good friend? They have answers really fast. They know a lot about like, good friendship. They can talk to you about what it means to be a bad friend. And so suddenly they're engaging in making decisions around good and bad relationship. And one of the things I found is that it's not very far from there. You can make this pivot where, okay, you know a lot about relational ethics. So let's talk about this. Why in the world would you be so invested in being a good friend? Because college students are very invested in good friendship. Why are you so invested in that, but then you don't want to think about ethics in relation to your sexual relationships or your partners? And so that's one of the ways in which I've gotten college students into this conversation. And this is one of the things that is fostered in this particular book. Because kids, like 5-year-old kids, I don't know how many of you here have kids, but your kids can talk about relational ethics because they know all about good and bad friendships. They experience this all the time. And so they can give you earfuls about this sort of issue. And I think part of what we need to do is empower kids to become ethicists, like to own the fact that like I'm an ethical being, I'm engaging in ethics all the time, I have ethical opinions about relationships. And I literally use that language to get them to think about it. So then just briefly, one of the things that I hear all the time that I love but also makes me sad is college students talking about how like if I could go back and talk to my younger self about sex, this is what I would tell that person. And so one of the things I did for this project is I asked a whole bunch of authors, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self, what would it be? And so I just give you a few examples, and then I'll stop. So I don't know if you will. So Elliot Schreifer, who's wonderful, he's a 2-time National Book Award nominee. He wrote, Elliot, right now you probably feel a little small and soft and sexless, especially compared to some of the other kids in your grade, and that's fine. Truth is, there are a lot of different ways to be gay. Porn will give you the impression of this is how people are supposed to do it, and being maybe a little too type A, you'll fight hard to fulfill expectations. Don't fight so hard except for the fight to be yourself. Real sexual intimacy with another guy will bloom when you communicate well with yourself and him about what you want. And it doesn't have to be what it seems like the rest of the gay world is doing. And when I read these, my heart does a little like squeeze. So Francisco Stork, who's also, if you haven't read Marcelo in the Real World, it's extraordinary. It's one of my favorite YA novels. There's an amazing conversation in there between Marcelo, the main character, and a rabbi about the meaning of sex. I love it. Hey, Chavi, listen, I'm not going to tell you that this thing you are feeling, this explosive force of wanting is not the real thing. It's love, all right. Just because you're 12 doesn't mean you can't experience true love. In many ways, what you are feeling now is truer than lots of stuff I felt when I was 35. I want you to take a few moments to experience what is true and genuine about what you are feeling. Inside this energy, can you detect the giving that is in it? The desire to make another person happy? Can you feel the respect for who she truly is and what you are feeling? You want her to love you back so badly, but you realize that her love must be given freely. Her loving you is up to her. I know you are afraid that she will find you unworthy, and if she does, you will hurt. There's no denying that. But this I can tell you from my old age. If your love is a giving and not a taking, you will be loved, truly and freely loved. And the last one I'll offer you, it's from Rebecca Stead. Has anybody read When You Reach Me? It won the Newbery a number of years ago. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's wonderful. So Rebecca said, when I was 10 years old, a man told me a sexual joke. It was about the way some women's bodies grow. I remember feeling scared right away. It was a mean joke, and it made me uncomfortable that he wanted to talk to me this way. But what did I do? I laughed and pretended, for his sake, that I wasn't bothered.
I couldn't imagine saying something as simple as, that isn't funny to me, or I don't want you to talk to me like that. The instinct to accommodate other people is a powerful one. It took me a long time to become aware of it. What I wish I could say to my 12-year-old self, or even 10-year-old self, is, Rebecca, it's not your job to make other people comfortable while they are making you uncomfortable.
So I'll stop there.
Thank you.